The city never slept, but Sarah felt invisible inside it. Cars rushed past her apartment building, lights flashing like promises meant for someone else. She stood near the window holding a cold cup of tea, watching people hurry home with purpose. Every sound outside felt loud, while her own life felt painfully quiet. The small apartment behind her carried the weight of months she wished she could erase. The calendar on the wall showed the same date she had been trying not to see. Rent day had come and gone again. She did not need to look at her phone to know. What waited there? Notices did not shout. They arrived calmly, firmly, and without mercy. She placed the cup down with shaking hands and pressed her forehead against the glass, breathing slowly as if that might steady her thoughts. Sarah had once believed hard work always saved you. She used to wake early, full of plans, confident. That effort would bring safety. That belief had faded quietly. The projects she depended on stopped coming. Clients disappeared without explanation. Each week brought fewer messages, fewer chances. She kept telling herself it was temporary, that something would change. But time did not slow down for hope. Adil had tried to stay strong for both of them. He worked long hours at a job that paid just enough to keep food on the table. When he came home, his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Sarah saw it in his eyes, the way worry lived there now. She hated adding to that burden. Each time she thought about telling him how bad things were, her throat closed. She told herself she was protecting him. Deep down, she feared his disappointment. More than his anger. She turned away from the window when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her body stiffened. The steps were slow and familiar. She knew that rhythm. 3 seconds passed. Then the knock came. Not loud, not gentle, just firm enough to demand attention. Sarah's heart raced as she walked to the door. For a moment, she considered pretending she wasn't home. That thought vanished as quickly as it came. Avoidance had already cost her too much. She opened the door with a weak smile that failed to hide her fear. Mr. Rafiq stood there with a folder tucked under his arm. He looked neat, calm, almost kind. His face showed no anger, which somehow made things worse. Anger could be argued with. Calm could not. "Good evening," he said. "May I come in?" She stepped aside without a word. The apartment suddenly felt smaller with him inside. He looked around briefly, his eyes taking in the worn sofa, the quiet room, the signs of a life under strain. He sat down carefully, as if everything around him was fragile. They did not talk at first. Silence filled the space between them. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, he opened the folder and placed it on the table. Papers slid forward. Dates, numbers, missed payments listed neatly. Like evidence of a failure she already knew too well. "I've waited as long as I could," he said. His voice was steady, almost regretful. "But this cannot continue." Sarah felt heat rise to her face. She nodded quickly, words rushing out before she could stop them. She spoke of lost work, of effort, of plans that had fallen apart. She promised she was trying. She asked for more time, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Mr. Rafiq listened without interrupting. He leaned back slightly, folding his hands together. His expression did not change. When she finished, the room felt heavier than before. "There are rules," he said, "and deadlines. I have responsibilities too." She knew that. She had known it all along. Still, hearing it spoken out loud felt like a door closing. Her shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine packing boxes, leaving this place behind, explaining everything to Adil. The shame of that image made her chest ache. Mr. Rafiq cleared his throat. He hesitated, just long enough to make her look up. "There may be another way," he said slowly. The words landed between them like something fragile and dangerous. Sarah did not ask what he meant. She did not need to. Her breath caught, and she felt a sudden chill. Despite the warm room, he did not explain further. He simply stood up, adjusted the folder under his arm, and moved toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back to her. "Think about it," he said. "Time is short." When the door closed behind him, Sarah stood frozen. The apartment felt unfamiliar now, like it belonged to someone else. She sank onto the sofa, her legs giving out beneath her. Her mind raced, trying to escape the meaning of his words. But there was nowhere to run. She spent the evening pacing from room to room. Every object reminded her of the life she and Adil had built together. Simple things, shared meals, late-night conversations. Dreams whispered in the dark. She wondered when those moments had started to feel so far away. Adil came home late. That night, he smiled tiredly when he saw her and asked how her day had been. She forced a smile of her own and said it was fine. The lie tasted bitter, but she swallowed it anyway. They ate quietly. He talked about work. She nodded, barely listening. When they lay down to sleep, Adil reached for her hand. She held it, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing. Slow as sleep took him. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She felt trapped between fear and guilt, unsure which one hurt more. Sleep did not come icily. Her thoughts kept circling the same question. How had things reached this point without her noticing? She remembered the early days of her marriage, when even problems felt manageable because they faced them together. Somewhere along the way, she had started facing everything alone. The next morning, she woke with a heavy weight in her chest. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, but it brought no comfort. She checked her phone, half expecting another message from the landlord. There was nothing. The silence felt intentional, like pressure applied without touch. She spent the day searching for work, sending messages, making calls that went unanswered. Each rejection chipped away at her resolve. By evening, her energy was gone. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Wondering how close she was to losing everything, when Adil told her he would be leaving town for a few days, her heart sank. She hugged him tightly, breathing in his familiar scent, wishing she could pause time. He told her not to worry, that things would work out. She nodded again, unable to speak. After he left, the apartment felt unbearably quiet. Every sound echoed. She sat on the sofa, replaying the landlord's words in her mind. Another way? The phrase refused to leave her alone. She tried to focus on alternatives, but every path seemed blocked. Her phone buzzed late that night. A message appeared on the screen, short, polite, from Mr. Rafiq. He was waiting for her answer. Sarah stared at the screen for a long time. Her reflection looked back at her, tired and unsure. She thought of the apartment, of Adil, of the life they were fighting to keep. She also thought of herself, of the person she wanted to remain. Her fingers hovered over the screen as fear and longing twisted together inside her. The choice ahead felt impossible, yet time was slipping through her hands. Outside, the city lights flickered on, and somewhere in the distance, a door closed. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that whatever she chose next would change everything. Days passed in the small apartment, yet the air felt heavier than ever. Sarah avoided the windows, the streets, even her own thoughts. The silence wasn't peaceful, it pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Each morning she woke. She half expected a new message from Mr. Rafiq, but nothing came. Or maybe something had already shifted. She couldn't tell anymore where her fear ended and her guilt began. She spent hours staring at the floor, tracing cracks in the tiles. As if they could give her answers she couldn't find anywhere else. Time seemed to stretch, slow and cruel. Even the ticking of the clock sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone patient and indifferent, while she panicked inside. Her phone stayed off most of the day. Every time she looked at it, she imagined the message, polite, careful, waiting. For her to respond, the polite words were worse than threats. They demanded thinking, required decisions she wasn't sure she could make. She tried to work on freelance projects to distract herself, but her mind refused to cooperate. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then dropped again. She couldn't concentrate. The world outside continued as it always did, with people laughing, cars rushing, lives moving forward, lives that didn't care that she was on the edge. She realized that desperation wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It crept, slow and quiet, and settled deep in her chest. Adil called that evening. He said he would be out of town for a few days, work meetings in another city, flights already booked. Sarah pretended to be calm. She smiled softly, masking the fear that tightened her throat, and told him she would be fine. She wished she could tell him the truth, but each word felt heavier than a stone. She did not want to burden him. He already carried so much, and she had convinced herself she had to carry the rest alone. After the call ended, the apartment felt colder. She walked from room to room, looking for comfort in places that offered none. Every object reminded her of him, of their shared life, of the warmth she used to feel here. But the warmth had retreated, replaced by worry and guilt. She sat down on the sofa and let her head rest in her hands. The thought that her choices might change everything haunted her. Sarah knew she was running out of time. Mr. Rafiq had been quiet, but that quietness was deliberate, almost strategic. She could feel the weight of his presence even when he wasn't there. The apartment had changed. It felt smaller, the air heavier, even the light seemed different, sharper, almost accusing. She replayed the conversation from that night over, and over his words, "There may be another way," echoed relentlessly. They were innocent, polite, almost casual, yet the implications were unbearable. Sarah hated herself for thinking about them again. She tried to focus on other things, cleaning, organizing, sending emails, but every task felt meaningless. Every second spent avoiding the truth pulled her deeper into anxiety. The day she met Mr. Rafiq again, Sarah's nerves were on edge. She had spent hours preparing herself, telling herself to remain calm, to act rational. She wore simple clothes, not because she wanted to impress him, but because she wanted to appear composed. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks before she opened the door. He greeted her as before, calm, polite, respectful. Nothing in his expression betrayed judgment. That made it worse. Anger can be argued with. Calmness cannot. He stepped inside, and for a moment the apartment felt unfamiliar. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady as they sat together in silence. The conversation started carefully. Mr. Rafiq spoke about obligations, about fairness, about the unavoidable reality of deadlines. Sarah listened and responded. She explained her efforts, the hours spent looking for work, the endless calls and messages that went unanswered. Her words were quick, precise, almost mechanical, as if speaking faster could somehow make the fear shrink. He didn't interrupt, didn't challenge her, didn't argue. He simply listened. But listening can feel heavier than shouting. Each word she spoke felt like an admission, each pause a confession. She noticed how her hands trembled slightly when she placed them on the table. Her throat was dry. Her mind raced with every possible outcome. Then came the pause. He leaned back, hands folded neatly in his lap. Sarah held her breath, sensing the shift in his tone before he spoke. His next words landed softly, deliberately, like snow settling over something fragile. "There may be another way," he said again. That phrase, repeated in her mind, became a storm she could not escape. The calmness, the politeness, the careful neutrality, all of it pressed down on her chest. She understood. She didn't need him to explain further. Every instinct in her screamed that choices were about to be made. Yet fear and shame tangled together, making action impossible. She left the conversation without agreeing to anything. Nothing would ever feel the same again. Alone afterward, Sarah sat on the sofa, staring into the middle distance. The room was quiet, yet the silence screamed. She felt the pressure of every decision she hadn't made, every lie she had told herself, every thought she had suppressed. She wanted to scream, to throw something, to run, but her body refused. Her mind raced with images she wished she could erase. She imagined leaving, the apartment empty-handed, calling Adil to tell him everything, facing the truth in the light of day. But the shame, the fear, the weight of failure kept her frozen. Desperation, she realized, had a quiet cruelty. It didn't come with noise. It came with choices. And sometimes it came with no choice at all. Night fell. The darkness brought no comfort, only reflection. Sarah lay in bed beside Adil, who had returned early from work unexpectedly, and felt a strange, unbearable distance between them. His breathing was calm, steady, and comforting in one sense, yet unbearable in another. She wanted to reach for him, to tell him everything, but the words refused to form. She feared his disappointment, feared the break in trust, feared the change that could never be undone. She focused on his hand in hers, pretending that the simple warmth was enough to hold back the fear that threatened to spill over. She thought about all the mornings and evenings they had spent together, all the small joys, the shared meals, the quiet laughter in the dark. Those memories clashed violently with the current weight of desperation. Love, she realized, could not pay bills. It could not erase deadlines, could not stop time from running out. And yet she wanted to believe it could. If only she held on tightly enough. If only she trusted it strongly enough. The following day brought no relief. Sarah spent hours wandering the apartment, tidying what she could, organizing what seemed unimportant, but each task felt futile. Every moment reminded her of the silence she could not escape, the looming deadlines, the impossible choices. She tried to focus on finding work, sending messages, following leads, but her mind refused to cooperate. Her thoughts kept returning to that phrase, that polite, impossible phrase. There may be another way. She hated herself for thinking about it, yet she could not stop. It hovered in her mind like smoke, filling every corner, coloring every decision, every breath. By evening, the exhaustion was unbearable. She sank onto the sofa again, letting her body collapse under its weight. She thought about Adil's gentle words that morning, about the way he had kissed her forehead and said, "Everything will be okay." She wished it could be true, wished she could believe it. But the distance between hope and reality had never felt wider. Each thought of what she might have to do twisted inside her chest. She did not want to imagine what another way could mean, yet she could not help it. Fear and longing, shame and desperation all tangled together, leaving her paralyzed. That night, she heard a soft vibration. Her phone lit up. Came message from Mr. Rafiq. Polite, simple, waiting. She stared at it, her reflection staring back at her from the dark screen. Her fingers hovered, trembling. She did not know how to respond. Outside, the city continued its noisy, busy existence. Inside, she sat frozen, trapped between fear and necessity, between what she wanted and what she might have to do. She closed her eyes for a moment, wishing for clarity, wishing for escape, wishing for a miracle. Sarah finally understood that desperation changes everything. It alters the way you see the world, the way you see yourself. It makes quiet rooms feel suffocating, calm words feel threatening, and simple choices feel impossible. She thought about love, about loyalty, about trust, about herself. She realized that the life she had known, the life she was trying to protect, was slipping through her fingers. And the choices ahead, whatever they were, would define everything. Not just the apartment, not just the money, not just the days to come, but the very core of who she was. The night deepened. The apartment was quiet, the city lights flickered far below, and Sarah remained seated, staring at her phone. Every breath felt heavy, every second stretched into eternity. Fear and longing pressed on her chest like a weight, and the memory of the landlord's calm, quiet voice echoed relentlessly. She knew the decisions ahead were unavoidable. She could not hide. She could not delay any longer. She understood that, whatever she chose, nothing would ever feel the same. And somewhere deep inside, a small, trembling part of her realized that some choices could not be undone, no matter how carefully she tried to protect herself. The apartment felt different when Adil returned. It wasn't the walls or the furniture. It was the air, heavier somehow, thicker, carrying a tension Sarah could not ignore. He walked in with his usual tired smile, but Sarah noticed the pause. In his step, the way his eyes scanned the room, searching for something she couldn't name. He spoke lightly about work, about his trip, about the errands he had run, but every word was carefully measured, every gesture slightly slower. The small routines of life, the sound of keys dropping on the counter, the soft hum of the refrigerator suddenly carried weight, significance. As if each object held a secret he already suspected. Sarah tried to act normal, to slip back into the rhythms they had once shared, but the effort felt hollow. She set the table for dinner, arranging plates and glasses with precise care, hoping the motions could distract her from the storm inside. Adil sat down, glanced at her for a moment longer than usual, then began eating. Sarah followed, chewing slowly, pretending that everything was fine while her thoughts spun uncontrollably. She felt every heartbeat echo in her chest. She wanted to speak, to confess, to make everything right, but fear clenched her throat. What if saying anything now shattered everything irreparably? What if the truth, once spoken, could never be taken back? Later, after dinner, Adil leaned back on the sofa, his hands clasped over his stomach. He looked tired in a different way tonight, not just physically, but emotionally. Sarah watched him, longing for the reassurance she once felt from his presence. But the distance between them had grown too wide, invisible, but real. She wanted to bridge it, wanted to reach across the space and grab hold of the man she loved, but shame anchored her in place. She could not find the courage to begin the conversation that had been gnawing at her for days. Not since the messages, not since the landlord's calm words. And yet the silence was unbearable. It pressed against her chest like a weight she could not lift. Finally, Adil spoke. His voice was quiet, not accusing, not angry, but careful, deliberate, almost fragile. "Sarah," he said, and she flinched slightly because even that simple sound carried gravity. "Something feels different. I can't explain it, but it's there. I feel it." He paused, searching her face. "I need to know what's happening. Please, just tell me." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had tried to prepare herself for this moment, rehearsing explanations, defenses, lies she could use. But none of them felt right. Her fingers trembled against the edge of the sofa. She swallowed, trying to steady herself, but it was impossible. Words tumbled out before she could stop them, halting, fragmented at first, then faster as guilt and fear pushed her forward. She told him about the landlord, the missed payments, the desperate messages, the nights spent alone worrying, the feeling of running out of options. She told him about her choices, every moment of weakness, every instinct to protect him while failing herself. She did not try to justify what had happened. She did not ask for forgiveness. She simply told the truth. Adil listened. He did not interrupt. His face remained calm, but Sarah could see the subtle shift, the tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes glistened as he fought emotion. He took a deep breath, finally speaking in a voice softer than she expected. "We were struggling." "Yes," he said, "but we were together." "And now?" He trailed off, looking at the floor. "Now, something's changed." His hands, which had been resting calmly, curled into fists, then relaxed again. His eyes met hers. "I need to know why you didn't tell me before it got this far." Sarah's throat burned. The words had been necessary, but they were painful. She tried to explain her fear, her desperation. The way she thought she was protecting him, the way her own pride and shame trapped her in silence. Each explanation felt insufficient, like pouring water into a cup with a hole in the bottom. She saw the hurt in his eyes, but she also saw something else. Patience, still there despite the pain, waiting for her to finish, waiting to hear her fully. The apartment was quiet except for their breathing. Every tick of the clock seemed amplified, every distant sound from the street below carrying significance. Sarah felt small, fragile, exposed, yet also relieved. Speaking the truth had not repaired the damage, but hiding it had been unbearable. She realized that sometimes the truth does not heal immediately, but its absence corrodes everything silently. She wanted him to understand, not to excuse, and she hoped, desperately. That love was still enough to survive this, for a long time. Neither spoke. They sat across from each other, two people bound by history, by love, by mistakes, and by fear. Sarah wanted to reach out, to hold his hand, to say, silently, I am sorry. I am still here. I love you. But even in the act of reaching, she hesitated, unsure if he would take it, unsure if the gesture could undo the fracture she had created. She remembered the early days, the easy laughter, the long nights talking about nothing and everything. The small warmth that had built their home together. That memory clashed with the current reality, making her ache in a way that was physical, sharp and unrelenting. Finally, Adil moved. Not dramatically, not in anger, but gently, as if testing the water. He reached for her hand across the space. Between them, his fingers brushed hers lightly, and Sarah felt a shock of warmth, a fragile thread connecting them again. She held it, trembling, letting the physical contact speak what words could not. He did not speak. He simply held her hand, waiting for her to continue. Waiting for the fragile trust between them to breathe again. Hours passed in silence, punctuated only by their occasional breaths. The faint hum of the city outside and the soft ticking of the clock. Sarah felt the weight of the night, the accumulated fear, and the relief of confession all at once. She realized that healing would be slow, that trust would not return overnight, that mistakes cannot be erased. But there was something in his touch, in his willingness to remain, that gave her hope, faint as it was, that some pieces of their love could endure. They had been through so much together. That bond, fragile though it now was, had not broken completely. In the days that followed, Sarah and Adil began to navigate the delicate terrain of rebuilding. Small things became monumental. A smile, a shared cup of tea, a gentle touch. The apartment no longer felt oppressive, though the memory of desperation lingered in every corner. They talked, sometimes haltingly, sometimes tearfully, about what had happened, about the choices, about the fear, about the guilt. The conversations were not easy, not light, but each one chipped away at the walls that had grown between them. Sarah learned that honesty, even when painful, could reconnect to hearts that had drifted dangerously close to breaking apart. They discovered that love, once fractured, is not the same. It is tempered, reshaped, scarred, but still present. They began to understand that mistakes, no matter how grave, do not always destroy the foundation. They are tests, challenges that demand courage, reflection, and patience. Each morning, Sarah woke and felt the apartment differently. She no longer feared every message, every knock. The world outside continued its rush, but she moved through it with more clarity, more purpose, more awareness of what mattered. She cherished the moments, small and fleeting, that reminded her that she was not alone. Even so, some nights were hard. Memories of what could have been, the fear, the desperate decisions, the shame, they returned like shadows that would not fade. Sarah lay awake, tracing the ceiling with her eyes, feeling the heartbeat of the apartment, the city, and her own conscience. Adil sometimes slept beside her, unaware of the storm still brewing quietly inside her. She learned to carry both relief and regret together, to acknowledge mistakes without letting them define her entirely. She learned that vulnerability, while frightening, was also the doorway to repair. And that trust, fragile as it is, could grow again if nurtured with honesty and patience. Months passed. The apartment no longer whispered threats or carried the suffocating weight of silence. Bills were paid on time. Work slowly returned, small projects first, then larger ones. The stress never disappeared entirely, but it became manageable. Sarah and Adil discovered a rhythm once more, quieter, gentler, tempered by the lessons of hardship. Their conversations, while still careful, carried depth and sincerity. Laughter returned in small doses. Smiles, hesitant at first, became more frequent. The apartment, once oppressive, now carried warmth again, not the easy, careless warmth of before, but a deeper, more resilient one. Born from shared struggle, Sarah often thought back to the moment when fear had pressed so heavily on her chest, when the future seemed hopeless, when she had believed that one choice could destroy everything. She realized that it was that very pressure, that desperation, that had forced honesty, reflection, and connection. She did not excuse her actions, but she recognized the growth they had prompted. The landlord's polite words, the polite danger of opportunity, had been a mirror showing her the stakes. They had led her to confront herself, to confront her marriage, and ultimately to confront love, not as a simple, easy emotion, but as something demanding courage, patience, and truth. One evening, as they sat together on the sofa, Adil reached for her hand and held it gently. Sarah looked into his eyes and saw the reflection of her own fear, her own remorse, but also the resilience of a bond that had endured. Words were unnecessary.